In the fall of 1966, I started seeing patients at Beth Abraham, a chronic disease hospital affiliated with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx. I soon realized that among its 500 residents, there were some 80 patients dispersed in various wards who were survivors of the extraordinary Encephalitis Lethargica, or sleepy sickness pandemic, which had swept the world in the early 1920s. Many were frozen in deeply Parkinsonian or catatonic states. And some of the patients had been like this for 30 or 40 years. The nurses who knew these patients well were convinced that behind their statuesque appearance, locked in, imprisoned, there were intact minds and personalities. The nurses also mentioned that the patients might have occasional, very brief liberations from their frozen states. Music, for example, might animate the patients and allow them to dance even though they could not walk, or to sing even though they could not speak. What fascinated me was the spectacle of a syndrome that was never the same in two patients. A syndrome that could take any possible form. A syndrome that included an enormous range of disturbances occurring at every level in the nervous system. A syndrome that could show better than any other how the nervous system was organized. It had been established in the late 1950s that the Parkinsonian brain was deficient in the transmitter dopamine. And I wondered whether L-Dopa could help my own very different patients. The license to use L-Dopa took several months to come. And it was not until March of 1969 that I embarked on a double-blind trial with 6 patients, putting 3 on L-Dopa.
And suddenly there's this incredible flowering.
There was a thrilling beginning, an exhilarating beginning, and everyone shared this exhilaration. We were all a bit manic and euphoric. And within a few weeks, the effects of L-Dopa were clear and spectacular. And I decided to offer L-Dopa to every patient.
I was asked one of his patients, "Do you remember when you first came to?" And she said, "Oh yes," very quietly. Suddenly, I was talking. And I said, "Do you remember your first words?" After not having been there for 30 years, "What were your first words?" She said. I said, "Phew, I'm talking."
And after her awakening in 1969, Rose immediately burst into fluent talk about Gershwin and others who were around in the 1920s. And I asked her, she was a very bright woman, she said, I know it's 1969, but I feel it's 1926. She said, I know I'm 64, but I feel I'm 21. She said, nothing much has happened in the last 43 years. So there had been not quite unconsciousness, not sleep, but some strange, timeless suspension of consciousness. At first, nearly all the patients' responses were happy ones. There was an astonishing, festive awakening that summer as they burst into explosive life after having been almost inanimate for decades. But then almost all of them ran into trouble, developing specific side effects of L-Dopa. Sudden and unpredictable fluctuations of response and extreme sensitivity to L-Dopa. Some of the patients would react differently to the drug each time we tried it. I tried altering the doses, titrating them carefully. But this no longer worked. There seemed to be, with many of the patients, nothing between too much L-Dopa and too little. The system now seemed to have a dynamic of its own. What was going on was so complex in both neurological and human terms that I felt a need to keep detailed notes and journals, as did some of the patients themselves. I started carrying a tape recorder and a camera, and later a little Super 8 movie camera, because I knew that what I was seeing might never be seen again. I had to have full biographic detail along with full sort of biological insight. I mean, this was a point where biology and biography intersected. All my patients are at this intersection. I mean, all of us are at this intersection. There were times in the first year when everything went bad, when I wondered what sort of awful situation I got the people into. And one of the patients said, that stuff should be given its proper name, L-Dopa. The majority said later they were glad they had it, but not all of them. Rose said very clearly that everything and everyone which had had meaning for her was gone. She didn't like our world, and she said this quite explicitly. And after 10 days of this extraordinary awakenings, she went back into this state with the head thrown back and the eyes gazing at infinity or nowhere. And despite altering the medication, we could do nothing. And she stayed like this for another 10 years. Was this physiologically necessitated? Was it a defense against an intolerable anachronism? I don't know. It was an infinitely complex situation.
The breakthrough with awakenings is just that there are no breakthroughs. I mean, you try with chemistry, you try with surgery, you try with all kinds of things to change things, but then there comes a point where you're dealing with not just the human condition, but the condition of life. The breakthrough is that you come to live within your means, and that the project of the doctor and the patient is together to find a way of living with what can't be changed. The whole point of his practice was to spend hours together trying to compose the story, which will help them go from being just abandoned objects in the corner to being subjects of their own lives.